If you've got 72% of the workforce being parents and carers, and actually both having to penalise their careers, we're probably setting ourselves up for a huge talent gap, like probably sooner rather than later.
Hey guys, it's Matt Haycox here, and welcome to another episode of the Matt Haycox Show, where today it's a show for both parents and business people alike, because I've got with me Hanson Lee, who is both a businessman and the owner of DaddiLife.com. It is .com, isn't it?
Yep,
Yeah? Right. DaddiLife.com, which is the UK's biggest platform for fathers. Over 150,000 members or users. So we're going to be talking today, I guess, about parenthood, about growing a business, about building a community, and lots more. So thanks a lot for being here, Hanson.
Thanks for having me on.
So obviously I've given a very brief introduction, but tell us how the business began, and before this business began, tell us a little bit about your story and your journey and how this actually came about.
Of course, be delighted to. So my career actually started on the shop floor, actually the co-op up in Manchester, straight out of uni, and then from that, a lot of my research and background has been actually more marketing based. So I got kind of a lucky break, if you like, straight out of uni, running a massive brand program. In fact, I always kind of joke that budgets have never been the same since, because I think it was the age of 24. I was given essentially like a £2 billion budget to manage what is still, I think, the largest rebrand in UK corporate history. And I always remember the next job I had, which was then in HR, asking, what sort of budget levels are we talking about here? I was thinking, this billion, it was about 20k, and I was like, oh God, what the hell have I done? But that was great. And so my career has really been involved for brand development, marketing, CRM, data, and lots of research and development for lots of Unilever. And I guess I've had a very unusual career. It hasn't really been a linear one. I've kind of just gone to where I thought there's been exciting opportunity. And I guess life changed tremendously about 5 years ago when I became a father for the first time to a young boy called Max. And at the time, to be honest, I knew I wanted to be a very different sort of father to what I experienced, to be honest. And even though there was lots of great blog content, there were lots of great parents, tweeting, Instagramming, shouting about their own lives, which was great. There wasn't really a kind of collective voice about fatherhood. And talking to a few other fathers and then doing our own research, which I'll touch upon in a sec, I knew that there was this generational shift when it came to fatherhood, but there wasn't really a place to capture all of that. So DaddiLife actually just started as a very simple social community. It grew really quickly to about 20,000 members. It's now on just over 150,000. And what we do now is both kind of B2C and B2B focused.
But when you actually started it, I mean, did you have, I guess, a monetization plan in place, and that it was going to become a business for you? Or was it just very much, this is going to be a hobby and this is going to teach me to be a better dad, or hopefully teach me to be a better dad?
To be honest with you, it just felt more like a passion that just kind of grew and grew and grew. So
you still had another job at the time. You still had income elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was it just felt like something that needed to be done. So talking to a few other fathers, the community, and the sort of sense of questions and the sense of real problems that dads had that just weren't being solved anywhere else. Like it wasn't. There are certain things that dads go through, particularly like at the start of their journey, whether that's with themselves and their own, sort of child bonding experiences, how to deal with partners, that actually, even though there's so much mum-focused content, there's about 4.2 million mum blogs or sites in the world, and probably less than 100 really of dad ones, and mostly those are kind of blog sites in the main. There wasn't that collective space.
Because mums talk too much.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like the language and actually that sense of mums, they have that strong sense of like sisterhood. Like I always make a joke that in years gone by, those kind of 2 a.m., 3 a.m. breastfeeding or early morning feeds, mums would usually say like phone their mums or have a closed connection of circle, but all of that's now been replaced by community. And like in a way, WhatsApp is kind of like now mum or dad's best friend at like 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. in the morning. And just all of that user behavior has really shifted, but actually there are dad-specific issues that just never really been uncovered. And I think if we're now going through this huge generational shift when it comes to how active and how involved and how equalized, I guess, dads want to be as parents, there needs to be that platform that's as much there for them as parents, that talks on their terms, covers things that they want to really cover and get into just as much as mums. And that's where I think we've really grown.
And do you find that you cover very different topics to what the mum sites cover, or is it just that you cover them with different language and in different ways, and I guess, market it differently?
A bit of both, to be honest with you. So there's some stuff that we'll cover, particularly around some of those early hours and early days, skin to skin. We'll do things. I guess one of our USPs is that you won't find many what I call sort of more BuzzFeed-led type content, like 5 different ways, 7 different ways. We kind of let the experts do that. What you'll see a lot more in DaddiLife is really in-depth guides, so often like thousands and thousands of words long, because that's what we find that dads really need and really want. They kind of want that central place to go to cover all of their answers. So some of that content, whether it's about reports on one-day fatherhood, how you can get involved, so certain things around early hours, early things to read, etc. Those things will be covered on different mum sites as well, but they'll often be talking in a way sometimes that has dads as a kind of more secondary thought. And I think where we've shifted the dial is we've put that right to the forefront and said, actually, if you're going to be the very best dad you can be, how can we provide the content, the community, the answers that shifts that dial? But there are other pieces of content as well that are just totally dad specific, like how dads talk to children in a world of e-safety. That is just an issue that I never had to deal with, my mum never had to deal with when she was a parent, or fathers as well. And how we talk to children, I think in this day and age, around certain things that dads will have a very specific view on, whether that's, how to deal with certain elements of girls growing up or boys growing up, or e-safety like I mentioned, or things around playing more outdoors. So, one campaign that we did with Sudocrem a couple of years ago was, we found now that with kids spending more and more time on screens, that actually there's, I think only about their research are saying kids on average in the UK spend about 4 to 5 hours outdoors a week, which is just crazy. I mean, if you think about when we were growing up, it would have been a total reverse of that. And so how we can get mums but really more dads actively involved, because the way that, for instance, dads play like with their kids even is totally different, we found through our research and science, than mums do. And so how we can start to create more of that equalised platform has been great. It's been great fun, and I think we're only really scratching the surface of how much bigger it's going to get.
And is it a social network as well?
Yeah.
It's not just the content. You put the dads together, link them up.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess our Venn diagram, if you like, is both content and community. Okay. So we have those active daily conversations with the community about crazy things, sometimes even things like around best dad jokes, through to having this issue at work. And the work side, I think, is something we've seen grow hugely, particularly over the last year. And it's something that we've researched in some pretty huge depth, actually, with a lot of dads out there. So we did a dad index a couple of years ago, which was the UK's first ever kind of real in-depth look at modern-day millennial fathers and some of their active involvement at home. So some of the key tasks that they were taking more charge of at home and how they were becoming more equalised. And what we were finding through that research is that even though dads are doing more and more at home, one thing that's still hugely missing is that at-work conversation. So when we partnered with Deloitte last year, it was all about trying to create that discussion around how we can shift the dial for dads at work. Because if dads are just expected to be at work, then actually that real culture change is just going to be really slow in happening. So those twin things, I guess, have seen our growth from a business perspective, both in terms of B2C. So we do a lot of content campaign work. We've done stuff with Sudocrem, with retailers that want to reach out and connect with dads in a different way and build campaigns around them. But a lot more of our work now is also B2B focused. So starting to go into different organizations, actually fundamentally change their cultures, because what we found is that there's a lot of, while that day-to-day management culture is being a bit of a barrier to dads being fully the sort of father they can be both at work and at home, it's not necessarily creating the change actually either for mums or dads at home quick enough. So a lot of our work has been a lot more B2B focused in recent times, and I think will continue to be so.
Let's just talk about some of the business side of this for a minute, because I think, for people listening to this or watching this, parents or not, I'm sure some people are going to be very excited at the prospect of somebody's passion project, which is then turned into a viable business and something with the size of the community it's got now. At what point did this, how far into it did this go from being a hobby to generating income, then from generating income to replacing your other job? How big is the team now? And I guess what tips have you got for other people out there looking to build a community? I mean, obviously every entrepreneur in today's world should be trying the hardest to build an online community, and you've done in a relatively short space of time an absolutely huge number.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'd say in terms of timeline, first 6 months, when it got to about 25,000, we were starting to be offered different campaigns, albeit at a slightly smaller scale. I think as it grew, particularly to about 18 months, that's where some of the kind of scaling of the commercial opportunity became more apparent. But all of that was more B2C focused at that time. So there were brands that wanted to connect and talk to dads in a different way. Probably some of our research helped with that in terms of starting to open those doors, because the Dad Index that we did a couple of years ago started to showcase how dads weren't just getting involved more at home and just taking on more parental tasks, but actually how that was shifting their consumer behavior. So as a result of that, I mean, I'll always remember this one thing where we found that more and more dads, for instance, were taking charge of bedtime and bath time. But those same dads, over 50% of those dads who had recorded those increases, so this was a study with just over 1,200 dads across the UK, were then the ones that are now taking charge of what to buy their kids in terms of bath toys, pajamas. And so they weren't just owning certain tasks, they were kind of owning whole routines. And I think that's, probably particularly powerful for brands and organizations to want to start to tap into. So that side of things actually, I guess from my background, has been a fairly consistently scaled area of the business. I think the thing that's been probably the biggest learning as well in terms of ups and downs and lots of successes and failures, to be honest, is not more the B2B side. Because the B2B side, I'd say, is only really within the last 18 months or so, where it's been less about how we can utilize content, community, or writers. So we've got just over 50 writers. Not all of those necessarily write all the time. We've got ones that are more regularly, ones that do that more part-time based. But it's a very virtual team. So we've got writers from Australia, from US, obviously one's in the UK.
How big's the full-time team?
Full-time team is probably 4 now.
Okay.
We've got ones in design, looking after the web and data. We're about to do a lot more work, more on the data side of things, and kind of starting to develop more that one-to-one relationship. But I think where, back to your earlier question, the B2B side has probably been the one that has yielded, in a way, probably the more interesting conversation, in that it's great to do campaigns and it's great to do things that hit the zeitgeist of where brands and dads connect. But I think the chance to then go into organizations and really change their cultures from kind of top down has been really exciting, but also, huge learning in terms of stuff that we were probably quite presumptuous with at the start. And now I think how we do it is a lot more effective, to be honest with you.
And just going back to that first 6 months and that audience growing, I mean, what methods, tactics, what were you doing during those 6 months to go from 0 to 20,000 users? Because I mean, I guess in today's social media world, most people are killed to grow their Instagram profile from 0 to 20,000 during that. Never mind, 20,000, targeted, registered, very niche down users. How did you actually go about creating that?
I think there are a couple of things in particular. I think one is we created almost daily conversation. So whether that be topics about how are dads doing, how they're doing in terms of not just their own child support, but also just themselves. Like, we've seen a huge growth and an important discussion about men and mental health over the last few years. I think we saw a lot of that in the early days around dads that have a sense of struggle but don't always know how to externalize that. And I think a lot of that is kind of still quite internalized, to be honest with you. And there's some, as we know, some pretty shocking stats around male suicide around the UK and the world. So I think just one, creating daily conversation, becoming a place of authority and trust, that dads knew that they could come to us, post different questions, have some of the things moderated. I think where the other thing we did as well is we kind of supercharged that with content that was based on that conversation. So a lot of the stuff we do, so we still do like a monthly feature that's a DaddiLife debate of the month, and that's a kind of debate-worthy piece. So whether that be about e-safety, how dads are feeling about kids going back to school in this kind of COVID age and the new normal, how dads are doing at work, and actually using a lot of that to replay it in the content that we create. I think the community has felt like they've been almost co-creating it with us, and I'd say they have, to be honest with you. It's been a real sense of us hearing what dads want and us responding to that as quickly as possible.
And okay, so we've got the niche down content. So I guess it's being very much about knowing your audience, and giving them something niche and different that others aren't. How did you actually find that audience? How did you how did you market? How did you get your first viewer, your second, your 20,000th?
So I think two of my biggest learnings over the last probably, I guess, 4 years, my SEO knowledge and community building and just social media knowledge, I'd say, was decent, but I wouldn't say like exceptionally good. But just, I guess, being relatively self-taught in those two areas over the last 4 years in particular. So reading a lot, getting mentored by the right people, particularly around like social growth. And I remember one day, a lot of our early growth was around how we would retarget certain pieces of content or certain elements of community answers and actually grow the audience. And actually, this is a time where, Facebook in particular was still, I wouldn't say unregulated, but it was a lot easier to kind of get that bigger reach. There's now, obviously, you've kind of got to pay for it massively.
Depressing.
Yeah, exactly. But I remember used to spending days and days of just like audience building and just looking at what profile of audience was really engaging with our content, our community, our discussion points, and why, and actually learning from them and almost like building. But now you could probably do it with the click of a button on a Facebook ad manager. Those days you kind of had to really manually build it. So I'd kind of literally be building these manual audiences and then targeting essentially like for likes. So sort of doing lookalikes, but in a really old school way. But that was really key to our initial growth. And then from that, as simple as it sounds, I think it's been about making sure we've been putting out the right stuff at the right time and also getting our own voice out there. So, the dad voice still is a relatively small voice. And I think if we're going to ever equalise the playing field fully, and I don't just mean equalise it just for dads, I think equalising it has as much benefit for mums, to be honest with you, as it does for dads. Getting our voice out there has been a key part of that. So, we've really been really lucky. We've been able to write for and be featured for lots of Financial Times and Sunday Times, talk to a huge variety of different outlets and sites. And I think it's just as we've got our own voice out there more people have become more aware of it and have come back and then actually started their own relationship with us.
So a question which maybe more from a slightly either selfish or self-interest bent. With you've got 50 odd content writers. Yeah. Are they all males and fathers themselves? Because when we create a lot of content for our businesses, I've gone through using using ad hoc freelancers and then trying to bring it in house to get I guess to get economies of scale and better pricing and more quantity. Whilst I'll always find that a writer will argue that as long as you're a good researcher and a good writer, they can create any kind of content. Yeah. I always find, particularly from a business perspective, that that if you're a business person reading content that has been written by someone who is not a let's say a knowledgeable business person in that area, it feels like it's got big flaws and big holes in it. And I guess parenting's any topic's probably the same. Do you find the same issue? Have you used I guess women and non-parents to write content and found it just doesn't work as well?
In short, yes.
We're probably not allowed to admit it in today's world.
I don't mind. I don't mind at all admit it because I think it's the honest truth, and the honest truth is better than not. I found in hiring writers, particularly in the early days, where they weren't dads and they couldn't empathise with because for me, like becoming a parent, I don't want to sound like too sort of blue sky and all sort of lovey-dovey about it, but I think becoming a dad has genuinely changed my life in so many ways, profound. Sometimes worse, sometimes better.
More expensive,
learning to lack of sleep, and all that sort of side. But actually finding, I think I became a lot more cognizant of things that I just didn't really care about before, like the way I think about the world from Max's future, or just the way myself, and I see this with other parents as well. I think the way that parenthood just changes your mindset towards certain things means that actually, I think unless, don't get me wrong, you could be a brilliant writer and empathize with it and do a hell of a lot of research, and you could get to it, but it might take time. Whereas actually, I found in certainly working with parents, they just get it a bit quicker. And I think that's been key. So I mean, there's been a couple of times where we've had hired mums. I think they've done a brilliant job. In particular, where we've had pieces of content or community discussion or campaigns where it's kind of needed both a mum and dad voice, or even like two same-sex dads, or like adoptive carers and all the rest of it. I think that's been absolutely key. I found though that non-parental writers have struggled a bit more to really get the tone of voice, to kind of get the full emphasis of it, and kind of go deeper than just at that kind of surface level.
Do you give your writers a face insofar as, are your writers part of the community? So Steve is, a member of the community.
Yeah.
Or it's not just that they're all writing as DaddiLife. They're writing very much as the individual writers themselves, and your audience will get to know the writers also.
Absolutely. So they always get their own authorship on the platform straight away, so they can hopefully build a bit of their own brand through that. In fact, there've been probably 2 or 3 instances now where a lot of our writers have kind of started with us and then gone on to write for Huffington Post and become a lot more regular journalists through that as well. That for me actually is great, because it starts to showcase the opportunity for them as well, and actually seeing other people grow through it is a point of personal pride too.
Tell me, so your 150,000 plus members, they're all UK?
No, so it's a mixture. I'd say probably about 80,000 are UK.
Okay.
The rest of it is mixture between US and Australia in the main.
So tell me about some of the big differences between UK dads and US dads, or Aussie dads, or between Aussie and USA. I mean, do you find there's different, different wants, interests, beliefs between the different nationalities?
That's a really good question. I mean, we were invited to actually present at the Lego conference last year in Denmark, and it's the first time where actually I've had a kind of congregation of all the different nationalities of fathers together, and we ran this workshop exercise where we asked, where is modern day fatherhood in your region, in your country, and how much more, or where else can it go to sort of improve it? And we had all sorts of people, like people from World Bank and UN and all the rest of it. And what we did is we actually, with each answer, we gave them the chance to make their own Lego character. And so at home, it's now on my wall. It's this massive poster of everyone's kind of answer with their little Lego men. And actually, I've got a funny story to tell. Well, I don't know if I have time today, but actually, I managed to get into a bit of an argument with all people. Malala's dad, who was there as well, who at the time wanted a different figurine, but we can get to that another time. But it's back to your question. What we found through that is that there's definitely a core trend of modern day fathers just wanting to be way more involved. And I think their whole approach to parenting is just breaking down the barriers of previous stereotypes of lazy fatherhood or sort of being a secondary parent. But in each region, there are some really interesting cultural differences. So one of the biggest ones is probably at work. So you see, for instance, the US is a great example where there's more and more activity now happening, I'd say, in UK organisations to start to equalise the playing field for parents at work. And so I'm really encouraged by the conversations, some of the consultancy that we do, some of the partners that we work with as well, that's starting to make some brilliant change at work for dads and parents as a whole. That conversation is nowhere near where it needs to be in the States. At all. And I think, consider that even recently, it's only been 4 years since the government introduced shared parental leave. It's not a perfect system, but it's definitely a great sign towards more being done in that space. The US, still has, well, in some cases, a week, if not actually a day, sometimes of kind of paternity leave. So there's lots there culturally, I think, still to be done there around people and effective work practices. In Asia, really interestingly, they've got one of the most generous parental leave schemes in the world. Actually, I think you can take up to 9 months, but no one takes it because culturally it's not seen as acceptable. And until we have those sorts of conversations, until we can unlock like real productivity from parents, carers, parents and carers in the UK is 72% of the workforce across the UK. But if we can unlock better flexible working, better cultural development, actually just fundamentally better work-life balance for them. I think we've seen, one thing I've seen in this unprecedented time of COVID is that where it's kind of forced people to be more remote working, to actually be away from the office, it's been actually in some cases some huge area of success, and we've been using some of those cases to kind of replay back to businesses. But I always say to businesses and people that it's been a really weird time because actually this is not real flexible working or real remote working, because on one hand you've kind of got to homeschool your kids here, at the same time trying to get that work deadline here, at the same time trying to answer this query here. So it's been literally a pull from all angles.
Well, I was just about to ask you, what changes have you noticed in your audience over the last kind of 6 or 7 months, of lockdown and during this COVID period? Have you noticed? Obviously, there'll be remote working or furloughing, etc. But have you noticed a big shift in people's wants and mindset now, having spent this prolonged period at home?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's been two things actually. I think it's been an awakening on two levels that we've seen through all the analytics as well. One is that and this is probably no surprise, but all of the areas where we cover things like things to do, like particular activities, particularly for like dads and kids, and how dads and kids can kind of bond over things like even simple things sometimes, like home activities or garden or camping together. That's obviously like been literally hundreds of % increase. Even like an article on tough trays. I don't know if you know a tough tray. You've probably seen it, but it's like this massive plastic square that you might see, and there's all sorts of stuff that just gets dumped on it, like toys and mud and this and that. Okay. But it's brilliant for early stage development. And we did a guide on it, years ago, and it probably is, it would regularly get a few hundred views, each month. I think over COVID, it's been rocketing. I think at one point it actually had 10,000 views in a day. Like, it's just been rocketing, and that's just one example. But it's been that things to do side has been full of an increase. I think the other thing though is it's been a real awakening, I think, for a lot of dads who've probably felt like they can't get off the roller coaster or the kind of hamster wheel, so to speak. Because I think a lot of fathers who, after that initial paternity leave, they go back to work and they're physically there, but like mentally, they are actually a very different person that's come back into the office. And I think particularly in certain sectors, we've seen this kind of hamster wheel effect of just not necessarily feeling like the same person, but actually feeling like you need to be present in a certain way. Otherwise, you'll kind of be kicked off or given like grunt work. And we've heard some horror stories of that too. But I think it's actually been a bit of a rude awakening for dads who've seen that the ones that weren't thinking about it before, that actually this is a chance to do something a bit different. And actually the ones and these situations where it's actually yielded way better family time as well as way better business success, and actually far more innovation and new ideas and new ways of doing things, that's been a real rude awakening, I think, for a lot of senior business leaders that we've worked with as well, for a lot of their workforce. For dads that have probably just not been aware of it before, but also we ran our own survey during lockdown, called it the Dads in Lockdown survey, and just asked about their own experiences of COVID, like how were they dealing at home, at work, is it making them reflect and change things for the better or worse after? And actually so many more were now actively wanting to have flexible working, remote working as an ongoing thing. And so I think we're seeing, COVID has been a really unprecedented time. It's been filled with obviously tremendous, unfortunately really horror stories really for a lot of families. But it's also and I hope we can capture this opportunity, like real shards of success for what family balance and what fundamentally business success can start to look like going forward. And in that way, it's actually been really encouraging.
And what about challenges? What challenges in a post-COVID world, or coming into a post-COVID world, are you finding that dads in particular are suffering?
Well, do you know what? There's one right around the corner next week, back to school. That is a huge one too, because so when the government announced that obviously kids were going to go back to school, or certain years were going to go back to school in June, for reception year 1, year 6, and I think a few of the secondary school years, they were placed in bubbles. So each of the school classes were only the size of 10. That's about to change now. So as of next week, back to school, back to 30 yards. The whole sense of second waves and all the rest of it. And I think when a time where parents are slowly being encouraged to go back to office spaces. And then I think this is where we've seen a lot more B2B inquiries around, well, we know that COVID has changed the way that people are thinking about how they want to work, where they want to work, what even work means these days. And where we're seeing, I guess, that challenge is, where is that balance now? So are we expecting our teams, our people, just to go back to office spaces and kind of pretend it didn't happen, but actually stuff has changed hugely, I think in some cases for the better? Or actually, can we use this time as a new dawn? And actually, this is where I guess a lot of our B2B work is with business, to say, actually, there were certain situations, certain teams who are actually way higher performing during COVID. How can we replicate that success right across the organisation? And so for me, that sort of challenge, I guess it's a cliche about challenge becoming opportunity, but I think this is definitely true of a lot of things that we're seeing, certainly around parental and back to work. The chance to now reframe what that needs to look like and actually how that can drive higher performance, it is a really exciting one. I think we're just on the cusp of it.
Talk to me about it's the fatherhood penalty.
Yeah.
Of course, I've heard the term, but I mean, I'll admit I've got no idea really what it means. I'm sure some of the guys listening and watching don't. So start at the basics. What is it and what does it mean?
So the fatherhood penalty is the kind of the dad's version of the motherhood penalty. So the motherhood penalty has been something that's been very real, certainly for the last generation, where mums have found, particularly where they've been more the primary carer, that they've kind of faced a quite stark choice really between either going back to work, but finding that actually work just wouldn't pay in terms of the right hours, the right kind of time, the right flexibility to also support childcare. So what we've seen over the last generation is that lots of mums have essentially fallen out of the workplace because in trying to balance childcare and work, something's always had to give, and it's unfortunately been, in a lot of instances, the careers. And I think what we're seeing now is that dads are kind of actually going through the same thing, actually, where in becoming more of that equalised parent, when dads are having to choose between becoming more active at home, supporting childcare, doing their bit and being the parent they want to be, or actually progressing their career, a lot of them and this came out really strongly in our Millennial Dad at Work research last year with Deloitte, they're actively choosing to kind of either stay where they are or even actually downgrade their careers in order to better support the dad they want to be at home and childcare. And actually what that means is that if you've got this situation where sort of mums and motherhood penalty and dads and the fatherhood penalty, what that means for the future of business, I think is hugely profound, because just the simple maths, just it kind of equates to, unfortunately, where I think we're having a rude awakening emerge, where if you've got 72% of the workforce being parents and carers, and actually both having to penalise their careers, we're probably setting ourselves up for a huge talent gap, like probably sooner rather than later. And so I think that's where a lot of our work has been really important for a lot of businesses, to start that conversation and start that real culture change.
And what is your advice to businesses or to fathers suffering this?
So I think one is that there's still not enough organisations and teams that think there's a problem. And so one of the things we found in the research is that actually 33% of all people we'd surveyed had actually left their jobs since becoming a dad. So this was a study with just over 2,000 people right across the UK. So 33% had left their jobs since becoming a dad to find better flexibility. Another 33% were actively looking. And so this is a real problem for businesses now, essentially. So I think business needs to start to be aware that this is not a kind of someday maybe problem. It's a problem that's happening right now, and that people are literally voting with their feet. And we know that with new generations comes different sorts of work patterns. And I think, we're all familiar with digital natives and kind of people that can just work from anywhere and work in very different patterns. And I think we're starting to see how these different patterns of work and parenthood means that the way we need to shift towards different work patterns ourselves and what leadership means in today's society and business is hugely profound. So I think first and foremost, businesses need to be aware that the problem, it might be hidden, but it's definitely a problem from what we've seen in the community in our research. And the second thing is, I think there's got to be a real commitment to this sort of change. And to be honest with you, as much as we're and I'm talking more about sort of big businesses and the ones that we've gone into, I'd say even for people that are watching this in your audience, even from the startups of today and tomorrow, the people that are going to be probably recruiting parents, or parents are going to be the ones that are going to be in and around that workforce, the ways that we actually think about working with them is going to be tremendously different to any time it's ever been in the past. So, even if you're a kind of one-man band, hopefully about to rapidly scale to hundreds and thousands, these things are going to be hugely profound. I mean, I'll give you a good example. So we did some work with LinkedIn a few months ago. And the reason LinkedIn called us in is, LinkedIn's probably like one of the world's oldest startups, right? And brilliant organization. The stuff they've got is awesome. But what they'd noticed is that the average age of their employees is now kind of early 30s. And suddenly they've got thousands of people who are becoming parents for the first time, and they just weren't ready. They're like, well, actually, they're asking us all these questions, like, we want to do leave different, we want to work this way, what does success look like, how can I work from home more, how can I do this? And just as a business, an organization, they self-admitted they just weren't ready for it. And we came in, we've done some work with them, and hopefully we can do more ongoing. But that's one example, and I think, startups of today probably need to be really cognizant of how they're growing with their people. And I think dads, whether they're a dad in business about to start their own thing, or whether they're a dad going to be another part of a new startup or a new business, an existing one, we're at the dawn of a really exciting time.
Well, talking of exciting times, what's the future hold for DaddiLife?
Just more growth. I think more community growth. We're doing a lot more with the community, with the B2B space, doing a lot more campaigning work. I think there's going to be a lot more. So we've just sponsored and supported quite a big flexible working event that's coming up. It's kind of the first of its kind. It's called Flexpo. It's going to be in November. And that's kind of the first event that's actually dedicated just to flexible working. And there's been all sorts of different businesses, some FTSE 100 ones that have signed up already, I believe. But it's all virtual as well. So the whole thing is going to be tremendous fun. So a lot more growth, a lot more community growth. I think for me, where success is going to be is, we know that parenting as a whole is still thought of as really a very mum-focused space. And I think the day that we can focus it as much, not just as a mum's world, but as a parent's world, and we include dads, whether dads with mums, or dads and dads, or dads and carers, where we can hit that level, I think that's when we know that we've achieved something. So a hell of a long way still to go.
Well, you've come a long way in a very short space of time, and use this chance to give yourself a little shout out. Tell everyone listening where they can find you.
Yeah.
Obviously, DaddiLife.com. But what about any social channels? Where can they find you?
Absolutely, thank you, Matt. So yes, you can find us at DaddiLife on Facebook, on Instagram. We couldn't quite get DaddiLife yet on Twitter, so we're Life Daddy on Twitter.
But just to be clear, it's DADDI.
DADDI, yes, Life. Just to be a little bit different.
Perfect. Well, Hanson, thanks a lot for being here. And guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please make sure you press like. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, do it so you can hear lots more guests like Hanson and hear from myself. Until next time, I'll see you again.